Hello, everybody. It is Wednesday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, assistant sports editor for multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined for our Penn State Whiteout Week podcast by Isaiah Maldonado. We missed last week. Isaiah was a little under the weather, but excited to talk some Penn State sports, Penn State football this week with the game against Oregon coming up. Before we dig into all of that, we want to remind you the show is presented by FanDuel. We also want to thank another sponsor. It's ZipRecruiter. Are you having trouble finding the right people to hire? Tired of sorting through endless resumes? Well, the future of hiring looks much brighter because ZipRecruiter's latest tools and features help speed up finding the right people for your roles so you save valuable time. And now you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/audio. With ZipRecruiter's new advances, you can easily find and connect with qualified candidates in minutes. See a candidate you're really interested in? You can unlock their contact info instantly. Use ZipRecruiter and save time hiring. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. And if you go to ZipRecruiter.com/audio right now, you can try it for free. Again, that's ZipRecruiter.com/audio. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. Isaiah, let's just get into it with this matchup and who's got the edge at the various positions. I think the quarterback comparison has really been heating up on social media between Drew Allar, Dante Moore. Who's got the edge there? A lot of Oregon fans chirping that Dante Moore is the better guy statistically across the board. Obviously, Drew Allar has a little bit more experience, has been in a lot more of these big games. So what's your interpretation of who's got the edge at that position as we head into this game? Is it Drew Allar and his experience with these big games, regardless of what he's done in the non-conference portion of the schedule, or has Dante Moore gotten your attention?
So what I'm going to say about this is I think undisputedly with the way the season has gone down thus far, I think Dante Moore from a technical standpoint gives Oregon that advantage at the quarterback position. I mean, when you look at his numbers, 962 passing yards, 11 passing touchdowns, only 1 interception. He's been able to effectively deliver the ball in the air time and time again, almost 75% completion percentage. So just from a pure numbers standpoint, how fluid he has the Ducks passing offense looking, I'm going to give it to them. Obviously, we want to see a little bit more out of Drew Allar. I've seen a lot of nasty stuff on social media regarding his QBR, saying that he would be more efficient hiking the ball into the ground every single play than what his QBR currently is. I believe it's somewhere over like 112th out of all FCS quarterbacks right now. So not great for him. I do think that the numbers are a little bit skewed to make him look worse. I don't think he's performed that poorly, but I think where he has the edge is like you were talking about briefly before, these high tension situations. Dante Moore is not used to playing in the whiteout. He can watch it from, the bench. He can see it on TV, but it's very different from when you're actually the starting quarterback, and you're in Beaver Stadium with over 106,000 people just creating that electrifying environment. So I think because of his inexperience and because he's still just getting used, the reins of this offense were just handed to him. So I think he's going to have a little bit of some trouble kind of adapting to everything going on. I think Penn State's defensive line is going to give him a lot of problems. I'm sure he's still going to be able to produce, but I think in terms of having that home field advantage and then really, hopefully, Kotelnicki pulling out all the stops for this offense, I think we'll see a very back and forth QB battle between these two.
Yeah, I think, listen, the stats are what they are. You rattled them off. Drew Allar's are just kind of pedestrian. And the question is, when you're facing a higher caliber of opponent, does the game plan change? And, it's not as if we don't have like a recent example. He played against this Oregon team in the Big Ten title game, and he made some critical mistakes, but he also made some incredible throws in that game. So it's a matter of can you remove the mistakes and continue to make the plays that he was making against this Oregon defense. So I think some of the stuff that more concerns me is what he's been saying more than what he's put on tape and saying I've been overthinking and things like that. Can he think a little clearer in a whiteout environment where it is going to be hyped? And can you just go out and make plays and maybe focus on that a little bit more? I also think, and James Franklin talked about this in his press conference a little bit, the pressure that's on them sometimes in these games against, lesser competition to blow them away by 100 points. And I wonder if, playing a better opponent takes that part of the pressure off, and he can just more focus on winning the game than playing perfectly. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Isaiah, we can talk about the running games as well. I think Nick Singleton, Kaytron Allen are the names that college football fans know. 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, we'd rather have Penn State's running game than Oregon's. But if you look at the stats, again, Oregon is averaging more than a yard more per carry. Jayden Limar is very solid, 6.7 yards per carry. But then you go down to some of these reserves. Dierre Hill Jr., 16 carries for 188 yards. He's averaging 11.8 yards per carry. Noah Whittington, a guy Penn State saw in that title game last year, 14 carries, 159 yards, 11.4 per carry. This is a very explosive group that's been making those plays that we haven't seen as much from Kaytron Allen and Nick Singleton in the early going. So who do you give the edge to in that situation? Again, with Penn State being maybe a little outstatted going into this game, even though there's a lot of confidence in the guys they have in that backfield specifically.
I mentioned how I feel like the lack of experience is going to get to Dante Moore, and it's that kind of same baseline of reasoning that I'm going to give it to Penn State here when it comes to Nick Singleton and Kaytron Allen. I feel like their experience throughout how they've matched up in these big games, how they've been able to produce time and time again. And, to your point before, James Franklin mentioned about specifically with Kaytron and Singleton that he wants them to go out there and play freely, especially Singleton, who might not have been seeing the same success in terms of generating those big plays, only averaging 4.5 yards, 4.4 yards a carry. Not that it's a bad number, but relatively pedestrian in comparison to Kaytron's 8 yards a carry. So I think that the biggest thing for them is they're used to this. They're used to these high pressure situations. They're used to playing in Beaver Stadium when all eyes are on them and the atmosphere is electrifying. And I think all props to Limar, all props to Noah Whittington. I think the big plays that they've been able to generate are undeniably what Penn State wants to reach at a consistent level. But I think when we're talking about skill of the individuals, I think that depth is going to matter for them a little bit less, considering, you're not going to have 4 guys getting significant touches in one game unless it's a blowout. And I don't anticipate this game to be a blowout. So I think when you're stacking it up to top 2 backs versus top 2 backs, I'm a lot more trusting of Singleton and Kaytron Allen, than Limar and Hill. So I think in terms of Penn State's rushing game, especially what we've seen from them, I think their numbers are a little bit down because of week 1 against Nevada. If we're looking at weeks 2 and 3, they were able to produce at a very, very high level.
Isaiah, let's talk a little bit about the receivers in this game. I don't know that anyone has a massive statistical edge. There's no one guy in these groups, either one that's particularly dominant. Jayden Moore he's been explosive. He has 12 catches for 207 yards, 17.3 per catch. But I don't know. These receivers are all generally in the same statistical range going into this game. I think the question I have is less, does Penn State have the edge over Oregon, and more, are Penn State's receivers going to show up in a big game? That has been, to me, the thread through the last handful of years of where Penn State has been most deficient. You can talk about Drew Allar, you can talk about the defense, but to my mind, they've had the pieces, even going back to Sean Clifford, to get the job done in some of these circumstances. And the receivers have flat out no-showed in some of these games. Or Trebor Pena, Kyron, Hudson, Devonte, Ross, are they ready to, get one catch, as we saw Penn State not get in the playoff loss to Notre Dame? Are they ready to contribute and be the difference makers compared to where Penn State's been in these stages the last couple of years?
I want to say that it's still a little bit up in the air. I mean, obviously, we've seen standout individual performances from a lot of these receiving threats, but we haven't really seen them put it all together in the way that we would like. I think you're right in terms of not any lone player having a statistical lead. But when we look at the passing offense as a whole, I mean, we have 5 guys over 100 yards for Oregon, 2 of them over 200. Penn State doesn't have a single receiver that has cracked that 200 receiving yard mark. So in terms of being able to distribute the ball and finding multiple targets, I think that Oregon has the edge there for sure. But I think it's really going to be important for every single one of these players that we brought in, Kyron, Hudson, Devonte, Ross, Trebor Pena. They need to be able to feel comfortable within the flow of the offense at the same time. James Franklin has spoke to it a little bit, saying that he would obviously love to have games where Ross and Hudson are just like that dynamic duo, bringing the ball up the field and dominating at the same time. But there's also going to be some times where you just need one guy to get into that flow zone. So I think in an ideal world, we would want to see this. We spoke about it a couple weeks ago, not these receivers not disappearing. But if that does happen, I think the biggest thing is that they're still able to get production out of at least one spot. We saw Kyron Hudson take over week 1 and have a phenomenal game. We saw Trebor Pena in the last game be able to get his first score, move the ball up the field, almost 100 total yards. I believe it was like 97. So we've seen what they can do individually. And if they can't produce that at this point in time altogether, then one of them needs to be able to dominate above the rest.
Isaiah, Penn State is a 3.5-point favorite, according to our friends at FanDuel. I think that's sliding back to where it was in the preseason. I think I saw Penn State as high as 6.5 at one point. But last I checked, it was 3.5. So if you're interested in placing a wager on the game, make sure you check out our friends at FanDuel. What's the confidence level in the Jim Knowles defense here? I've seen a lot of Ohio State fans kind of chirping about how that defense wasn't quite ready to go into Eugene last year, into that matchup. Obviously, things were corrected pretty well because you saw Oregon again in the Rose Bowl, and Ohio State dominates in that game. Offensively, yes, but the Jim Knowles defense did dial things up really well to hold that Oregon offense in some level of check. You and I have talked about the breakdowns his defenses have had early in his tenure in places as he's getting that kind of aggressive system in place. Do you think Penn State's prepared to keep the big play in check against one of the ultimate big play programs in Oregon?
I do, honestly. I feel like this is where Penn State is objectively going to shine the most. We know that if there's any questions around Penn State, typically hasn't come from their defense. It's typically relating to the offense, and if they have the firepower to be able to stay in these games, dominate down the stretch. We know the defense has put in great efforts before, but if we, touching back on that Rose Bowl game, when Ohio State and Oregon met again, I mean, Oregon finished with -23 rushing yards. So if we're talking about Penn State being able to stop the run, Jim Knowles is the guy for that. To be able to adapt on the fly in one season and become significantly more equipped just a few weeks later, I think is something that is going to play really big into this game. Obviously, when we go to a personnel standpoint, then we have the guys, or Penn State has the guys to be able to stop them. We have Alonzo Ford, we have Zane Durant, we have Xavier Gilliam. These are all people who are going to be able to get the pressures, going to put a lot of pressure on that offensive line, make their way into the backfield. And in terms of getting those pressures out, then that's exactly what they're going to need. So from a personnel standpoint and a coaching perspective, Jim Knowles and his system, and what we've seen from Penn State just in terms of stopping the run, I believe they're the 33rd second rushing defense. So have against lower tier opponents, of course, we have to take it with a grain of salt, to lower tier FBS schools and one FCS school. But at the end of the day, they have been able to stop the run. They haven't allowed a rushing touchdown on the season. So we're talking about a dynamic Oregon rushing game, but Penn State has been dynamic at defending the rush. So I think it's kind of one of those situations where it's an unstoppable force meets an immovable object, and we need to see which one is going to overtake. But once again, I think everything comes back to that whiteout environment. And we know that the Nittany Lions are going to be more equipped, knowing that everything is that all of these cheers, all the sound, it's in their favor mentally, and just having that mental fortitude. It's going to play a really big part in these players being able to wreak havoc, just like Ohio State did against Oregon last year.
I'm going to maybe play devil's advocate on that part of the conversation, Isaiah, because penalties were a huge piece of the Big Ten title game last year. Oregon's tempo was a challenge at times. And it took a little while for Penn State to settle in. When they did, they started getting stops, but they were on skates for the first quarter and plus in that game. And that wasn't a unfavorable environment for them. There weren't a ton of Oregon fans there. It was definitely probably at least 65-70% Penn State fans in a dome. And they didn't seize that opportunity the way I think a lot of people hoped that they would. It's also true that Penn State has not played in what I would call a true whiteout environment probably since Auburn in 2021. The last 3 years, you've had Minnesota, Iowa, and a year ago, Washington, and none of those teams were of the caliber that this Oregon team is. Do you have any level of concern about composure? Because I know James Franklin addressed that a little bit as well. Are they going to be able to seize this moment in the whiteout where it is a true big game and it's not one of these dumb big noon situations? Like, certainly, you've been in Beaver Stadium in huge games with top 5, top 10 opponents in the last handful of years. But this is like a different beast. Waiting all day. The crowd is definitely more sauced with more time to spend in the parking lots. Is Penn State ready to, not do what it did in Indianapolis a year ago?
I think it's less of a question of if they're ready, and it's more of a fact that they have to be ready. I think when we look at everything historically with this Penn State team, shying away from the biggest moments and shrinking when the lights are brightest has kind of become synonymous with this team at certain moments. And I think in order for Penn State to take advantage of one of their highest AP preseason polls, the solid start that they've gotten off to right now, en route to hopefully win their first Big Ten championship and win the conference for the first time since 2016, there's a lot riding on this game. And I think when you look at all of that pressure, it could be easy to say that because there's so much on their shoulders, it's even more that they might crumble. But I believe that in face of adversity with the way that this team is currently constructed, I think on anchoring on the back of this elite defense with a mind that is capable of stopping this Oregon offense, I think that is going to be a really big security blanket, kind of that cushion for Penn State to kind of fall back on. I think their offense, James Franklin spoke to it saying it's going to be really important for them to start just quickly on both offense and defense, to not take as long to get started, as you mentioned previously. And obviously, while that may be the goal, I really do think that Penn State's defense has the personnel to limit this Oregon offense enough until their offense can get going. And it's a risky game to play. I think obviously if the score kind of stagnates, the crowd in itself is going to kind of add that pressure to you. But I also think that it's a double-edged sword, because if Penn State is able to make some big plays early and establish a lead, then you're only going to be more invigorated by that sauced audience, as you mentioned before, allowing the alcohol. It's going to be a great environment for people to really let loose. And that's what James Franklin wants. He wants them standing up first, second, third, fourth down, punts, kickoffs, everything possible. He wants to really show Dan Lanning and Oregon what a Penn State 7 p.m. whiteout game looks like. And I think that with all the mental reps and all of the simulations in practice, I would hope that they're ready for this moment, because at this point, there's no running away from it now.
Isaiah, let's talk a little bit about the vibe around town. Are you sensing a tension? Because I think going into these big games in the last handful of years, especially against Ohio State and Michigan, Penn State's gone on, or at least the fan bases seem to have a level of pessimism. There's been a tension, a waiting for the wheels to start flying off. I again bring up that Auburn whiteout in 2021 as maybe the last one of this vintage where Penn State fans had a lot of confidence going into that game, and the air was pretty light, and the expectations were high, and Penn State was able to meet them. Are you sensing more of that Auburn 2021 kind of vibe about this game, with Penn State favored by a significant amount of points, knowing that Oregon doesn't have the Ohio State, the Michigan experience in this setting? Or do you think there are a lot of people who just at this point need to see this team prove it against the top 10, top 5 opponent before they're going to believe it?
I mean, I think it's right with the latter. I think you can have this growing tension, but I think there's a set, kind of like an underlying just set of nerves in everybody when we just look at things from a statistics standpoint. I mean, being, I believe, 1-14 against top 5 teams, being 4-20 against top 10 teams since James Franklin has come to the Happy Valley, there's a lot of pessimism around just these matchups. Historically, they haven't been in our favor. And I think because of the significance of the whiteout and the success Penn State has had in the whiteout, you mentioned that Penn State hasn't had too many high caliber games in terms of the whiteout. But at the end of the day, still 6-1 against ranked opponents in Beaver Stadium when everything is packed out. I think it is undeniably going to play really big into the moment. And I think that if there's any time for Penn State to win, it's going to be right now. To your point, it's not an Ohio State. It's not a Michigan. It's not a team that's as familiar with that environment as some of our Big Ten rivals. And I think that because of that, they have to seize the moment. They have to catch them off guard. They have to succeed in showing Oregon how devastating and how oppressive a whiteout environment can be early on, and make it so even if they're able to regroup and kind of reevaluate how they have to play to contend with Penn State, by then it needs to be too late. So I think that that's kind of the mentality that a lot of people around campus and a lot of people regarding, when talking about this game feel. It's time for Penn State to be able to pull out all the stops and get a win against a real high quality opponent.
Isaiah, the place is under construction, and I think that's an interesting component of this. Certainly, we've seen them fill it up for this non-conference portion of the schedule. But listen, people are going to need to use the bathroom. They got this, and I think it's going to be a little bit different with people having been drinking all day out in the parking lots. Is the place ready for this event logistically? In your experience and what you've seen, and then just in terms of the sound. Do you think it's going to be that whiteout environment that we've come to know, with that whole west side of the stadium having, basically changed since the last whiteout a year ago?
I do think that to some extent it might be a little bit harder. The temporary seating in the bleachers definitely can make things a little bit jarring, and sometimes it may not look as complete in that, perspective. But I do believe that it's less about the current state of the stadium and more about the legacy of the whiteout game. I think at this point, with how successful Penn State has been in whiteout games, with the presence and the hype around the whiteout game for not just people within the State College area, but just kind of a Pennsylvania area at this point in time, I think it just has so much going for it that it would almost be impossible, especially with facing a caliber opponent of Oregon. It would be impossible for this to not feel like a traditional whiteout game, even with the construction in the stadium. I believe that it is going to be packed beyond belief. I've heard the crowd from the press box when we're playing Villanova, when we're playing FIU, when we're playing Nevada in those big moments. And if I can hear that kind of excitement and energy and passion from the crowd against an FCS school, then I don't even know how many times it's going to be multiplied against a team like Oregon that has so much weight for Penn State going forward. A match that can really determine where they place in the Big Ten. It'll determine just the conversations that people are putting Penn State in regards to being a true national championship contender. So there's a lot riding on this match. And the fans feel that too. So it's hard for me to imagine that this doesn't feel like a real authentic whiteout, like it was in 2021 with Auburn.
Isaiah, you mentioned the stakes in this game. I think the way the national picture is shaping up, Penn State's at a huge risk here of, if you lose this game at home, I think the voters are going to punish them pretty badly. You look at you've got LSU at 4, Georgia at 5, Oregon at 6, Oklahoma at 7, Florida State at 8, Texas A&M at 9. The first team with a loss is Texas at 3-1 at number 10. Their loss is to the number 1 team in the country, and they got dropped effectively 10 spots from the preseason poll. Would have a similar resume to Penn State. You look at Indiana at number 11. Would they have a chance to climb over Penn State with the win against Illinois? They also have famously bad non-conference schedules, but they'd have the big win, and Penn State would not. Texas Tech is a team that's got a lot of money behind it. They've done a lot of stuff in the transfer portal, so they're a team that is hot with a lot of pundits. And then you got Ole Miss at number 13. I believe they got a big game this weekend that may weigh on their chances. But Isaiah, it doesn't seem inconceivable to me that Penn State could drop out of the spots that would be, at larges for this playoff. And that doesn't mean that they can't climb in. There's a long way to go, but it does seem like their fall could be pretty stark if they don't win this game.
I mean, I agree. I think this game really sets the precedent for the rest of the season. Like, I would go as far as to say that if we win this game, our chances of going, or Penn State's chances of going 12-0 are very real. I think Ohio State, of course, they're number 1. but they haven't impressed me the same way that they have in past years. So I think that game is a lot more of a toss-up than it may seem. And then, but if we do lose to Oregon, or if Penn State does lose to Oregon, then I think that matchup against Ohio State becomes exponentially harder. And there's obviously, I don't even have to say it, but there's a world of a difference between being 12-0 and being 10-2 when it comes to this national college football playoffs picture. So, I mean, there's a lot of teams that could potentially pass them. Obviously, Oregon would jump up. Or I think we'd almost effectively guaranteed drop down to at least 8. So we're looking at a potential 5-spot drop. I think Texas might have a toss-up. I think it depends on if Penn State were to lose, how badly they were to play. Because obviously only putting up the final score for Texas and Ohio State was it 14-7?
Close game.
Close game, but very abysmal offense from both sides. But I think that hit Texas really hard in terms of how much they fell. So I think it all depends on how Penn State plays in this matchup. I think if there's a situation where they look messy and they look not put together and the crowd is actually doing more harm to them than good because it's a new team, a lot of players that aren't as familiar with the whiteout environment, I think it could spell some trouble for them in terms of the national picture and where they would fall into the playoffs. But at this point, it's the matter of avoid that at all costs. You don't want that to be a situation to where you head into that Ohio State game, which is going to, at that point, be your end-all, be-all. You would rather go into that game undefeated and deal with the potential risk of dropping to 11-1, but almost guaranteed still being within that top 7, top 6.
Well, and if you can beat Indiana, you'd be on the glide path to the Big Ten title game. So even if you lose to Ohio State in Columbus, you'd have a chance to maybe get back at them, in Indianapolis. And even if you lose that game, as we saw last year with Penn State, it didn't really change their outcome. Arguably, maybe it made it a little easier because they ended up getting SMU and Boise State along the way before they faced Notre Dame. I'll be blunt, Isaiah. I don't see a team that I don't think would have just the way the voters have been behaving, the way they dropped Penn State this week below a Miami team that has really, I'm not that impressed with them. If their big win is Notre Dame, a team that, only won their first game last week, I didn't get that logic, but Miami climbed ahead ostensibly because they played a better schedule than Penn State does. And I think the first team that I don't think the voters would put ahead of Penn State is probably Iowa State at 14. I think every other team I can imagine the voters putting Penn State behind them, even if I can look at Indiana and say I think Penn State's a vastly better team and shouldn't be punished for losing to Oregon. I think that is what might happen. So Penn State, this is a big one to your point, because if you win it, I think you insulate yourself against a lot of stuff for the rest of the season. If you lose it, you're going to be playing from behind. You're going to be scoreboard watching, hoping this team loses, that team loses. Not only just a matter of getting in, because as we learned last year, playing at home is important too. And if you lose this game, how much does that damage your ability to get a home game? Because Penn State was sweating that out through a good chunk of last season as well. So massive stakes here in this one. You're going to be back here on the YouTube channel, Isaiah, after the game, doing your report from the field at Beaver Stadium. So if you're just joining us for the first time, please subscribe to the channel. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Help us out in the YouTube algorithm. And, of course, check out Isaiah's work at postgazette.com in written form and consider a subscription there as well. We'd really appreciate it. And we'll talk to you again on Saturday.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.